right, I think we'll go ahead and get started, and then I can let people in if they show up a few minutes late, but that way we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end for any that would like to ask them. My name is Hillary Bales. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Personnel Services, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Washington.
Hi, everybody. I'm Elizabeth Washington. I'm the Director of Special Services here for Waynesville Schools. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is our second session of our parent night. And so for those who were at the first session, thank you. And for those who are here at the second one, we welcome you. We have partnered with Dr. Juan Meraz over the last couple of years to work on equity and inclusion in our district. And he's out of Missouri State University. He's the Assistant Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion at Missouri State University and has done a great job with helping us make sure our classrooms are equitable and all our students feel safe and included. And I'm going to turn it over to him shortly. He is going to go over some of the training that we've done with our staff over the last couple of years, and then we can gladly take any questions at the end. So, Dr. Meraz, it is all yours.
Oh boy. Well, good afternoon. Glad to have everybody with us, and I'm excited about the opportunity. And like Dr. Washington said, it's basically a look into what we're doing with our faculty, our staff, and eventually our students, and it's giving them the tools to be inclusive, to be welcome, and to be valued. And that's what it's about. That's how we create the right environment, especially in a learning environment where the students feel safe and of course valued. And of course their perspectives are always valued and understood as much as possible. We give them a chance to help us to learn. My favorite phrase is help me to learn, because we can't know all things and can't be all things to all people, but that's how we grow together. So let me jump to the PowerPoint. I'll share my PowerPoint with you. And everything's on there. All right. And this is our Tiger Pride Session 2, Diversity 201. We did a 101 that was basic fundamentals, understanding of what inclusion is and belonging is. This is our basic agenda for today. Here's your welcome. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you with us. And here's our schedule. We're going to review our rules of engagement. Once again, it's a learning environment. That's what it's about. Then we're going to add a few more on our inclusive terminology. And it's terminology more so that our staff, our faculty, and our students can be aware and understand what everything is. They may not use that terminology, but at least they know what it is. And we want to make sure nobody gets blindsided and understands these new words that are new to some. Some might be, a little more familiar with it. We're going to watch a video on difficult dialogues and how to handle them, because we have difficult dialogues sometimes at school, but also in the family and in the workplace. You never know where it's going to come up, and it gives you a good guidance for that. We'll have a video on that, and then we're going to review our implicit bias. That helps us to understand that, it comes from our brain, that we're wired that way, and sometimes we don't. It helps us to understand where it comes from. And then, of course, the conclusion is going to be every kid needs a champion. It's a great video that we're using with our faculty development as part of this year's learning and growth. And it's a wonderful video, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. So if you would save as many questions as you can at the end, we'll give you time to answer whatever comes up through your mind, okay? Thank you for joining us. Here's our rules of engagement. Be fully present, and that means be here with us as much as you can. We know sometimes the phone rings or kids want something else, or sometimes, for me, my dog wants to go out. Try to concentrate as much as we can. That way we can ask good, concise questions. Be self-responsible for change. My job as a certified diversity professional and our staff's job is not to change you, but to give you tools to have those questions and understand the new environment. Listen, and respond. Once again, that's so we can ask as many questions as possible at the end. Experiment with new behaviors. Some of these things you'll watch on the videos may be new to you, and that's part of it, understanding new perspectives, different perspectives. Doesn't make it right, doesn't make it wrong. It's just different. And then that's how we grow and say, okay, I understand that a lot better. Take risks, be uncomfortable, and then let go. That means get out of your comfort zone. Right now, we're at Zoom. Some of us are at home, some are in our office, we're in our comfortable chair. Part of it is when we learn different things, it may be a little bit uncomfortable for us. That's what it means, because it's different. Doesn't make it wrong. It's just a different perspective. Accept working through conflict. That means we're all coming from different backgrounds, different understanding, different areas, how we grew up, where we grew up, even who we grew up with. And that's part of that perspective of change. Be crisp and to the point, and that's so we can ask as many questions as possible. Be open-minded. That's a critical piece right there. Be open-minded so that you're aware and knowledgeable and saying, wow, I didn't know that, or I see this. This is a great opportunity that I didn't have maybe growing up, or it's some of the new dialogue that's going on. Be soft on people and hard on barriers to understanding. Do we have barriers that keep us from being connected with the school, with this teacher, with the administrator? Is there an artificial barrier there that doesn't exist, but yet we create it and say, oh, well, I can't talk to that person because they're such and such, or this is their position. That's what it means by that. There's really no barriers, that we can have that open line of communication with everyone. And the last one is honor confidentiality. You know, somebody may want to share something and something that's critical here, so we want to have that opportunity to really respect and give that person that dignity of that confidentiality. Inclusive terminology. We hit a lot of terminology last time. We're going to hit a few more words this time, added on top of those other ones. We're constantly building our terminology as we grow. An ally, that's someone who supports and advocates for others who don't necessarily look like that. Anti-racist, this is one of our newer terms, and that's a set of beliefs and actions that oppose racism and promote the inclusion and equality of all people in a society. That's about that. That's a perfect analogy there, a perfect way to put it. Equality of all people in our society, that everyone feels valued and welcome. Bias, that's an inclination or prejudice in favor of or against someone or something, usually unfair. And we've all got biases, and we've all got implicit biases. That's why we're going to watch another video on implicit bias so we get a better understanding of it. BIPOC, this acronym stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. That's gained popularity as a more inclusive term than people of color. It used to be POC, when talking about marginalized groups affected often by racism. And that's so that, once again, we're addressing people and meeting them where they want to be, and meeting them and helping them to be welcome, valued, and included. Cisgender, this one comes actually more from our younger students. And that's a term for people whose gender identity matches their sex assigned at birth. That's all that means. But sometimes some of our younger students use it. That way we all know what it means. Culture, shared attitude and behavior characteristics of a particular group. We have a culture in Waynesville. We have a culture at the school system. You have a culture at home. That's basically our shared characteristics as we move forward as of a particular group. Cultural competence, and that's one of our pillars here at Missouri State, and that's the ability to successfully negotiate cross-cultural differences. That we come from different perspectives, different ideals. Like my GAs, I've got 2 from India, 1 from Africa. They're always teaching me because I don't know their culture, as they ask me about questions about mine being from the Latino culture, but also we're all learning the American culture that's constantly evolving. Cultural consciousness, that's a skill set that includes fostering critical awareness and inclusion, okay? That's a continuous movement model. You can never, your consciousness is always growing, and we're always changing and evolving, and that's where we are now. We're learning new things that we didn't know even 20 years ago that makes us more culturally conscious. Denial, that's refusal to acknowledge something as true even when proven to be so. Denying somebody their dignity, their truth, that's really where that comes from. Discrimination, unjust prejudicial treatment of others based on race, gender, sexual orientation, age, religion, ... means that's not an all-inclusive list. It could mean a lot of different variants. These are some of the basic ideals that it came from, but it's evolving depending on where you are, where you grew up, and even it could even be where you are in the workplace or even in the school. Diversity, individual differences or group social differences that can be engaged in the service of learning. And I love that last part, the service of learning. That's what we want to do. We're becoming more knowledgeable, more aware, more inclusive, and that's the service of learning. We're learning from each other and growing. We're making each other better. That's part of the inclusive excellence piece. Emotional tax. This is a newer one that most people don't use very often. That's the unseen mental work that people have for marginalized backgrounds, have to do every day to feel included, respected, and safe. And that could be women, that could be people from a different race, a different identity. So, you know, that's a tax. That's sometimes they feel they have to pay a price to feel included. And we want to make sure that people don't have that emotional tax, that they automatically feel included and valued. Ethnicity, often used interchangeably with race. Ethnicity usually refers to more than cultural heritage including specific norms and values that are shared with the group. Once again, norms and values that are shared with the group. Equity, a condition resulting from attention to access and success, such that categories of identity are no longer predictors of achievement. That means we have opportunity for everyone, regardless of their background, that we value what they're going to bring in. When we're, like right now, I'm on a search committee for our chancellor in West Plains. We want somebody that's going to bring in good leadership, good style, good characteristics, good moral value, but also be very inclusive and value our changing environment. We don't have a lot of racial diversity there. We have a lot of socioeconomic. That's also once another piece of the comprehensive definition of diversity. Heteronormativity. This is a newer one. The belief or assumption that all people are heterosexual and that heterosexuality is the normal state of being. This has come more into play with people that use different identifiers and don't want to be necessarily recognized for their cisgender. They say, I want to be recognized by my pronoun. And that's okay. That's how they're comfortable. We use those more and more as identifiers at the university level. Some of our students put them on their taglines of their email. Some of our faculty use them. And that's just another sense of identity. Not right, not wrong, it's just what it is. Historically exclusive group, the term is used instead of minority group as a more inclusive and precise term regarding the impact of group membership. Any group that has been historically disenfranchised is deserving of that label. And I use that especially because then it adds value to everyone that you could be part of the historically excluded group. And now you really, someday that term won't exist because we're all going to be included and valued. Implicit bias, and we're closing our session today. Well, next to last session today. Also known as implicit social cognition, implicit bias refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. And it comes from our brain and how we're wired and how we see things that are different, that look, think, and act different as a danger instead of saying, wait a minute, this is our learning environment. Let's learn something different, something new, something exciting. Intersectionality. This is a newer piece also that's used more frequently. That's the intertwining of social identities such as gender, race, ethnicity, social class, religion, sexual orientation, and or gender identity, which can result in the unique experiences, opportunities, and barriers. And what we're figuring out is we all have intersectionality. We all have things that are strong, that we're strong at, and others that are opportunities for us to grow and hopefully eliminate any barriers so that we truly have open and equitable access. Inclusion, the active, intentional, and ongoing engagement with diversity in people, in the curriculum, in the co-curriculum, and in communities in ways that increase awareness, content knowledge, cognitive sophistication, and empathetic understanding, so that everyone feels valued, they feel comfortable asking what they don't understand, having those dialogues, and then once again, it's like they're part of the family and they're valued. Microaggression. Microaggressions are commonplace verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative slights and insults to people on the basis of an aspect of the person's identity. And it could be women, it could be people of color, it could be people with different abilities, and it makes people feel uncomfortable. And you want to make sure that everybody understands and says, wow, that could be considered a microaggression. Misgendering. This is a newer term once again. When someone incorrectly identifies a person, such as a transgender person, by using the wrong label or pronoun. And that's another group that's growing in identity and values so that they also feel included and valued. I've been working understanding the transgender population since 1997. It's a growing population and understanding that dynamic so that they're really addressed correctly or valued correctly. Multicultural, pertaining to more than one culture. And this is our fastest growing identifier in this country, especially towards the racial combinations. And it's a multicultural piece. It's more than one group where they take value in the groups that they come from, the understanding, the history, the knowledge, but more the awareness and the connectivity with other groups. Non-binary, that's an adjective describing a person who does not identify exclusively as a man or a woman. This is once again one of our newer terms, and that's where those pronouns come in, how they identify, how they see each other, or how they want to be addressed. Prejudice. And that's an unfounded negative belief or judgment made about an individual or group prior to, and sometimes in spite of, any actual knowledge or experience involving that person or group. Also, hatred of an individual or group based on superficial knowledge or a stereotype. Once again, a prejudgment. That's what prejudice is. It's a prejudgment where they're adding a value where they may not even know that person, but think, okay, I'm going to put you in the box because that's easy for me, comfortable for me, and I see you as this instead of really getting to know the person. Privilege, which I often use, opportunity, generally thought of as unearned rights, benefits, and advantages enjoyed by a person or body of persons beyond the advantage of other individuals. Okay, it doesn't have to do with a particular group. It just has to do with opportunities and things that go ahead of others. Like I have privilege because I'm bilingual. You know, I have the opportunity to work in two groups, English or Spanish, and I have that, what I call that opportunity to work in two groups. So I'm excited about it because I get to speak with parents in one language and kids with another one, especially when I go recruiting Latino students, because the parents like one language or the kids like the other. They're more comfortable in English. Race. Race is a social construct whose meaning is best understood by exploring the legal, social, and political impact of the race label ascribed. Okay, it's a social construct. We give it more value than it really has. Most countries don't use race as an identifier. Here, people use it before to misidentify or lower a group's opportunities because of that perspective of privilege and power. But really now, everyone should have opportunity to everything. Racism, and this is a newer term that's come more into play probably the last couple of years than the previous 30, practices and policies based on the perceived superiority of one's race. And this came long ago from research that was done in this country, but it was never put into place. And part of it is categorizing people by what they look like and even their shades or even their perspective, when it all had to do with where they lived and even how close they were to the sun that affected their skin, the pigmentation in their skin. Stereotype, that's a standardized mental picture held in common by members of a group or representing an oversimplified opinion, affective attitude, or uncritical judgment as a person, a race, an issue, or an event. That means, once again, it helps us to be simple and say, oh, I'm going to put you in this box because we're wired with that shortcut, that preconceived notion, instead of saying, wait a minute, let me really get to know this person. Let me get to know their characteristics. Let me know where they're from. And you realize you have more in common than you do different. And of course, our last term and our expanding list, you know, it's changing every day for me. A culture's or group's shared standards of what is good or bad, acceptable or unacceptable, desirable and undesirable. Values may be transmitted directly or indirectly, formally or subtly, written, voiced, or simply enacted. Some values remain invisible while widely shared and can be thought of simply to be human. And our values generally come from, like our ethics, when you're young, from your parents, your grandparents, your uncle, whoever raised you. That's where a lot of your values come in, of right or wrong, or what's acceptable or unacceptable. And as you grow older, you'll say, you know what, these values I like, I've added some more, or this doesn't match up with my values, I've become a different person. It doesn't make it right or wrong. It just makes it more of who you are as a person. And this terminology is one that we share with all of our teachers so that they understand and they value it, and they can use it or not use it. Whatever, these are tools for their own success. Difficult dialogues, our next component, deals with that. Difficult conversations, whether you're telling the client the project is delayed or presiding over an enthusiastic performance review or an inevitable part of management supervision. How should you prepare for this kind of discussion? And how do you find the right words in the moment? And you can manage and exchange so that it goes as smoothly as possible, because we've all had those difficult conversations. And as teachers, as administrators, as professionals, sometimes we have to have those conversations with our students or with a colleague. And we want to make sure that we have the tools to be successful, to have the right conversation, not a confrontation. First part is change your mindset. If you're gearing up for a conversation you've labeled as difficult, you're more likely to feel nervous and upset about it beforehand. Instead, try reframing it in a positive or less binary way, so that it's not a confrontation once again, but a true conversation. Breathe. The more calm and centered you are, the better you are at handling difficult conversations. Take regular breaks throughout the day to practice breathing. Too often we get keyed up and the emotions really build up instead of saying, this is the logical piece. Let me breathe, take my breath. Okay, let's have a good discussion. Plan, but don't script. If you can plan, if you can help to plan what you say by jotting down a few notes and key points before the conversation, okay? Something that'll help you remember. As you get older, I know I've noticed that we don't remember as well as we used to, so it helps to keep some basic notes, not what you're gonna say, but that'll help you to remind you what the conversation is about. Acknowledge your counterpart's perspective. Don't go into difficult conversation with the my way or the highway attitude. Meet people where they are. Be compassionate. Experience tells us that difficult conversations often lead to strained working relationships, which can be painful. You know, that confrontation gets in the way of the true conversation. Slow down and listen. To keep tensions from blazing, try to slow the pace of the conversation so that it's a conversation. When you get keyed up, you tend to talk faster, things get lost, and it's like, that's not what I meant to say. Give something back. If you're embarking on a conversation that will put the other person in a difficult spot or take something away from them, ask yourself, is this something I can give back? Is there something I can give back? Can I acknowledge them and say, well, you know what? I never thought about that point. You're bringing this to the conversation that I never thought of, because we can't think of all things. Sometimes we see it from a perspective. It helps us to see all perspectives. Reflect and learn. After a difficult conversation, it is worthwhile to reflect post-conversation and consider what went well and what didn't go so well. You know, we always evaluate everything that we do, good, bad, or indifferent, and say, wow, okay, this is a great learning opportunity. This went okay, or let's have another conversation because some of the points didn't come across, but our conversation has been begun. And here's a good video on how to have a difficult conversation. And this is a colleague of mine that I met in Boston. I'm gonna mute my face in my video.
Or admitting failure, that you really blew it, or another. Stressful conversations are unavoidable in life, and in business they can run the gamut from having to fire somebody, which is like the most gut-wrenching thing you will ever have to do, or admitting failure, that you really blew it, or another thing that you might have to do is deal with a customer who's really upset.
How about a smoothie? What's in that?
Smoothie's a juice drink. We want coffee.
And I think it's very natural to want to avoid those conversations like the plague. But especially in business, there's an epidemic right now of people that are unwilling to have uncomfortable conversations. Harvard Business School just did a study and they found that 67% of managers are uncomfortable talking to the people they manage. And this gets me to what I want to talk to you today. It is the secret to how to have a difficult conversation. Because what's critical is learning the skill of untangling your emotions from the subject matter and being able to go face to face with anybody and have that difficult conversation. There are 4 techniques that I use whenever I'm going to have a difficult conversation that help me stay focused on what I need to talk about instead of getting hijacked by my emotions. Number 1, I always start the conversation by acknowledging my responsibility in the mess that we have to talk about. Whether it's the fact that I've avoided dealing with this sooner or whether there's something that I've done that's contributed to the situation, I acknowledge it right up front. And one of the reasons why that's so important is because by accepting some responsibility, you're diffusing the other person's emotion, you're also honoring them a little bit, and it sets a much more level playing field for when you get into the difficult things that you need to talk about. It's also going to put the person that you're speaking to a little at ease, so they're going to be able to listen. Number 2, you want to have a goal. Never go into a difficult conversation without an outcome defined before you go into it. The reason why the outcome is so important is because this conversation is going to be a roller coaster. The person that you're talking to might get upset. You yourself might feel emotional at some point, whether you're angry or you're triggered or you get sad. And so when you ride the roller coaster of emotion, the thing that is going to stabilize your thoughts is the outcome that you're causing. You're having this conversation because you're committed to making the relationship better. You're having this conversation because this isn't working, and so we need to end it powerfully. You're having this conversation because you want to give somebody some feedback that's not so fun to tell them, but you're giving it to them because you're committed to their success. Okay? So that goal, you feel yourself getting emotional, you come back to it, you come back to it, you come back to it. Third thing you're going to do a lot in this conversation, you're going to listen and you're going to validate. So you're going to say what you need to say, and then the other person's going to react. And instead of arguing or debating, I want you to listen and I want you to validate what the person is saying. It may sound counterintuitive, but honestly, one of the most powerful things you can do in any conversation, whether you're fighting with your kids over curfew, or you're arguing with somebody at work over workloads, whatever it may be, is hear where the person's at.
Listen to me, listen to me.
The moment you say, wow, that must be really tough, what you're dealing with, or, oh, I totally get why you now were avoiding me. If I felt the way that you felt, I'd probably do the same thing. The second you validate somebody, they immediately stop defending themselves. It's unbelievable, actually. Unbelievable. You've got to try it. Validate, validate, validate. It is the most powerful thing. And then once, of course, they feel validated that you've heard them, now they can listen. And that's when you come back to the final thing, which is you're going to restate always the outcome. Keep coming back to it. Keep coming back to it. And yeah, it's not going to be fun. It's not going to be easy. You're going to have all kinds of emotions come up because you've been avoiding this conversation. But I'm telling you right now, if you find the confidence and the courage to go and to start this thing, acknowledge your responsibility, have an outcome in mind, validate the other person, validate, 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 and keep talking till you hit that outcome, you're going to be really, really amazed at how much easier these things become. And if you want to make it even easier on yourself, rehearse it with another friend first, somebody that's not involved in the situation. Because again, difficult conversations comes down to one important thing: the ability for you to separate your emotion about doing it from the things you actually need to talk about and the outcome that you want to cause.
And our next component we're going to talk about is implicit bias. What is unconscious bias? Unconscious bias is also known as implicit biases. They are the underlying attitudes and stereotypes that people unconsciously attribute to another person or group of people that affect how they understand and engage with a person or a group. And here's another quick video. Once again, I'm going to mute my face and my voice so get a better production of it.
Your brain, by some accounts, receives roughly 11 million pieces of information each second, but your conscious brain is only able to process about 40. How do you handle all the rest? You handle it because you're really using two brains. Your conscious brain, which works with facts and data, has very little capacity and processes information slowly, and your unconscious brain, which is habit and intuition driven, has huge capacity and is really fast. One of your unconscious brain's best tricks is its ability to recognize patterns and use them to assign people and things to categories, allowing your unconscious brain to deal with all of the known, not dangerous issues, and leave only the few unknown or dangerous issues to your conscious brain. This allows us to recognize a pattern and act on it, rather than having to think about every interaction as if we were experiencing it for the first time. We can glance at that four-legged animal and know if it's a wolf or a cocker spaniel. That recognition allows us to make assumptions about the animal facing us, that the wolf belongs to the wild animal category and is likely to be dangerous, or that the cocker spaniel is in the domestic dog category and not likely to be dangerous. The assumptions we make about these pattern groups are likely to be based on our own experiences, on information we have gained from our culture or background, or from the media we listen to or people we admire. Unfortunately, those assumptions are often wrong. When we categorize people, our brains apply two other tools. One is affinity bias, a hardwired preference to respond positively to people who look, sound, and act like ourselves. Brain imaging scans show that when people are shown images of faces that differ from their own, it activates in milliseconds activity in the part of the unconscious brain that alerts us to possible danger. This may reflect a survival tool left over from ancient times when danger often came from those outside our immediate group. Today, however, This means the associations and biases are likely to be unconsciously activated every time when we come across a member of a group, even if we consciously reject group stereotypes. In addition to affinity bias, our unconscious brain categorizes people into groups and then connects those groups to our learned ideas or constructs about what is good or bad. Now, we've decided whether someone is like us or not, and whether they're good or not, all within milliseconds of meeting them. So, what can you do to manage your unconscious biases? You've already started by just learning about unconscious bias. Now, identify your own biases and address one at a time by building inclusive habits. Remember, if you do not intentionally, deliberately, and proactively include, you will unintentionally exclude.
And all the videos that you're going to watch today, including the next one, they're all YouTubes. And if you want additional information, we could send you the links so you could watch them again. They're great learning tools, and I use them in all the sessions that we've done with our teachers and some that are coming up later next month. We want to make sure that we all have the same foundation, the same strength, the same skills, and really look at the classroom, that we do have that equitable learning and that the students are really engaged and valued. The next video was sent to me by my colleagues there at Waynesville. They're using this as a leader in me this year as their kind of their mantra and their leadership styles. It's one of my favorite videos. I watch it all the time. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. So I'm gonna once again mute my face and mute my voice, and then we'll come back at the end and have plenty of time for questions.
I have spent my entire life either at the schoolhouse, on the way to the schoolhouse, or talking about what happens in the schoolhouse. Both my parents were educators. My maternal grandparents were educators. And for the past 40 years, I've done the same thing. And so needless to say, over those years, I've had a chance to look at education reform from a lot of perspectives. Some of those reforms have been good, some of them have been not so good. And we know why kids drop out. We know why kids don't learn. It's either poverty, low attendance, negative peer influences. We know why. But one of the things that we never discuss, or we rarely discuss, is the value and importance of human connection. Relationships. James Comer says that no significant learning can occur without a significant relationship. George Washington Carver says all learning is understanding relationships. Everyone in this room has been affected by a teacher or an adult. For years, I have watched people teach. I have looked at the best and I've looked at some of the worst. A colleague said to me one time, they don't pay me to like the kids. They pay me to teach a lesson. The kids should learn it. I should teach it. They should learn it. Case closed. Well, I said to her, you know, kids don't learn from people they don't like. She said, that's just a bunch of hooey. And I said to her, well, your year is going to be long and arduous, dear. Needless to say, it was. Some people think that you can either have it in you to build a relationship or you don't. I think Stephen Covey had the right idea. He said you ought to just throw in a few simple things, like seeking first to understand as opposed to being understood. Simple things like apologizing. You ever thought about that? Tell a kid you're sorry, they're in shock. I taught a lesson once on ratios. I'm not real good with math, but I was working on it. And I got back and looked at that teacher edition. I taught the whole lesson wrong. So I came back to class the next day and I said, look, guys, I need to apologize. I taught the whole lesson wrong. I'm so sorry. They said, that's okay, Miss Pearson. You were so excited. We just let you go. I have had classes that were so low, so academically deficient that I cried. I wondered, how am I going to take this group in 9 months from where they are to where they need to be? And it was difficult. It was awfully hard. How do I raise the self-esteem of a child and his academic achievement at the same time? One year I came up with a bright idea. I told all my students, you were chosen to be in my class because I am the best teacher and you are the best students. They put us all together so we could show everybody else how to do it. One of the students said, really? I said, really? We have to show the other classes how to do it. So when we walk down the hall, people will notice us. So you can't make noise. You just have to strut. And I gave him a saying to say, I am somebody. I was somebody when I came. I'll be a better somebody when I leave. I am powerful and I am strong. I deserve the education that I get here. I have things to do, people to impress, and places to go. And they said, yeah. You say it long enough, it starts to be a part of you. And so, I gave a quiz, 20 questions. Student missed 18. I put a +2 on his paper and a big smiley face. He said, Miss Pearson, is this an F? I said, yes. He said, then why'd you put a smiley face? I said, because you on the roll. You got 2 right, you didn't miss them all. I said, and when we review this, won't you do better? He said, yes, ma'am, I can do better. You see, -18 sucks all the life out of you. +2 said, I ain't all bad. For years, I watched my mother take the time at recess to review, go on home visits in the afternoon, buy combs and brushes and peanut butter and crackers to put in her desk drawer for kids that needed to eat, and a washcloth and some soap for the kids who didn't smell so good. See, it's hard to teach kids who stink. And kids can be cruel. And so she kept those things in her desk, and years later, after she retired, I watched some of those same kids come through and say to her, you know, Miss Walker, you made a difference in my life. You made it work for me. You made me feel like I was somebody when I knew at the bottom I wasn't. And I want you to just see what I've become. And when my mama died 2 years ago at 92, there were so many former students at her funeral. It brought tears to my eyes, not because she was gone, but because she left a legacy of relationships that could never disappear. Can we stand to have more relationships? Absolutely. Will you like all your children? Of course not. And you know your toughest kids are never absent. Never. You won't like them all, and the tough ones show up for a reason. It's the relationships. And while you won't like them all, the key is they can never, ever know it. So teachers become great actors and great actresses, and we come to work when we don't feel like it, and we listen to policy that doesn't make sense, and we teach anyway. We teach anyway because that's what we do. Teaching and learning should bring joy. How powerful would our world be if we had kids who were not afraid to take risks, who were not afraid to think, and who had a champion? Every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists that they become the best that they can possibly be. Is this job tough? You betcha. Oh God, you betcha. But it is not impossible. We can do this. We're educators. We're born to make a difference. Thank you so much.
And that's really one of my favorite videos. And a new quote that I just picked up today here it goes. Diversity requires equity. Equity requires inclusion. Inclusion requires empathy. So we have great empathy for our students, great value for our students, and we value each other. And the exciting part is now we've got our parents more engaged. And I think that's critical to the success of our system. So I'm gonna stop the share right there. And now we've got plenty of times for questions. I'm looking forward to see what we have in our minds. Thank you. I think we had a couple of things in chat. Let me double check. I'll argue that females are the most historically excluded group ever still. Somebody said that, yes. That's one thing we're always looking at female inclusion. Fortunately, we've got two great female leaders with us that I learn a lot from them every day. In fact, when I do trainings, I use my executive assistant and my other colleague because they bring in different points that I don't think of as a male, and it makes me better. You know, and that's part of our full development. So, any thoughts or questions? You got about 15 minutes, so we got a lot of time. And we have the great Dr. Washington with us and the soon to be Dr. Abales with us. So you've got a lot of doctoral power in this room. Yes, I think, Natasha, you've got a question? I see your hand up there.
Yes, it's a two-part question.
Okay.
So the diversity lessons and trainings that we're reviewing, the faculty and staff of the school district is being taught that?
Yes. We're trying to make sure that every level. So we started with the administration, with the leadership team, and then we're going to each different school, either via Zoom or live, so that they have access to all these tools. And that way they can say, well, I really like this tool, or I like this tool, or this is a new terminology for me, so that we're all on the same page. And that's part of the learning process, that we're all, same slate, and that we can really ask those questions. And they can ask me, or they could ask our leadership team.
So with their trainings, do the trainings address potential barriers they may have to implementing some of these inclusive things that you're going over, such as religious values or personal conflicts that they may have in implementing some of it?
Yes, these development sessions are wide open, and we leave lots of time for questions, especially the leadership team, our administrators, and now as we're getting to work more with the teachers, so that they understand. Sometimes these questions might come from the students, and make sure that they get the right answer. And if they don't know the answer, they could ask the right person. Like if they might not know the answer, it's okay to say, I don't know. Let me ask Dr. Washington, let me ask Dr. Bales, let me ask the superintendent, let me ask my principal, so that we have resources throughout the system. In fact, I've even done a couple of sessions with our transportation team, which most people often don't realize that's the first point of contact for most of our kids, that they get on their transportation to go to school. Who do they talk to first? The driver. So that becomes a critical component of our connectivity with the community. Good questions. Yes. Thank you. Any other questions or thoughts?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is James Zigapusma. I've got two children that go to Thayer Elementary here on the military installation of Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. This is the second Zoom call that you've presented. It's the second one that I've sat in, and we're going down a rabbit hole that I don't like. So if you would humor me for a few minutes, I'd like to ask some questions.
Sure.
Before I start, I would like to set the stage on how I identify. I identify as a Christian.
Okay.
Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, and this is my doctrine that I go by. And I'm a father of a child that goes to this school, and as you can see, we're very, very diverse. And also, I'm an American, and we got the Constitution, we got the Bill of Rights, and we have the Declaration of Independence, which all of these things that I'm hearing on the Zoom call are issues of concern. I am with you, I'm an American as well. I will tell you that with that in mind, those documents, okay, basically what I'm getting from this Zoom call is scaring the living hell out of me. And let me tell you why. Let me present it. You started off by saying, you know, we're going over this so people can feel safe, valued, and included. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Okay. I can assure you that I do not feel safe, valued, included. I can assure you that the country, the 50 states in the United States, do not, many people do not feel included. They feel that this is very divisive and not inclusive, which kind of, if you think about it, goes against what you're teaching, correct?
If you put it in that perspective, yeah.
Okay. Well, before I ask my questions, I just wanted to make one point, and the point that I got to share to the group is, you know, truth is God and God is truth, and Satan is the father of lies and lies is from Satan. So you have good and evil. There's a battle. Wherever your religious belief is, there's a battle going on in our battle space. The question that I wanted to ask, and a couple, if you would please, is this is new. We've been in the school for 3 years. This is the first time we're going through this type of training. One, who authorized this training? Who's the approving authority for this training to be taking place?
Well, the Board of Education and is the final approving power in the school district.
And when was this voted on?
Oh, sir, I don't have the exact dates on that, but I can look that up for you and get that information to you.
I would greatly appreciate it.
Sure.
Do you know if it's been within the last 3 years?
Yes.
Okay, because myself, I only can speak for me, but the scuttlebutt on the playground is nobody's heard of this until they've received these random emails. So I would greatly appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
The other is, what's the purpose of this training? The slide sets went out to, I am of the understanding it went out to teachers and staff. Is that the only audience for this slide set right now?
It started with the administration, then the teachers, then the staff, and eventually we've had a couple of dialogues even with some students. So a lot of it's not really a training, it's more of a development. Training means you're going to do this no matter what. This is more of an awareness piece. And people are going to take it and say, I like it, I don't like it. That's why I said, you're going to like some of the terminology, you may not understand it, but it's really going to give you an awareness. I'm not trying to change anybody. None of us are trying to change anybody. And that's part of my professional background as a certified diversity trainer, is to give you the tools and you decide what you like, what you don't like. When you said it scares you, guess what? It scares a lot of people. Why? Because it's new language. It doesn't mean you have to adopt it, but at least you're aware now. You understand the environment that we're in. And right now we're very polarized as a nation. There's two different perspectives. We're not trying to change anybody's perspective. We're trying to give our teachers an understanding and a knowledge and an awareness of some of the new dynamics that are in place. That doesn't, we don't want them to change who they are. We want them to be aware that maybe some of these students might be hearing this at home, so they understand the conversation. So they understand, well, we're learning this. If you looked at that last video, it focused about being a great teacher. I work with students that are going to be teachers, and I teach them multicultural education. My job is to give them tools so that they understand the new environment, so that they understand very different perspectives. If you look at education, when it started from the Bible. It started from a tablet, from a piece of wood that had biblical sayings on it to teach people how to read. We've evolved from that to read different things. That doesn't mean you have to like everything you read. That doesn't mean you have to read everything and like it. It's part of your knowledge base. You could say, I like you said, my life is based on this. Others may have a life that may not be based on that, but at least the key thing is you're having that conversation and understanding so that you can have a dialogue. It doesn't make it right, wrong, or different. It's just so that you understand, so they can meet people where they are. You know,
So this isn't about.
I have great colleagues, sorry, I have great colleagues that are at Evangel. That's a religious institution. They have a very different perspective on diversity than we do at Missouri State because we're a public institution, than Drury, which is a private institution.
Mhm.
That doesn't make it right or wrong or different. And the kids are all learning the same language, the same understanding, just so that they know what they're talking about, so that they don't get blindsided when they go out and teach and then they say, well, I don't know what that means. This is just an awareness piece. So when you talk about training, you don't train people. We give them development models and opportunities to learn. We're constantly learning. And that's one thing that I learned throughout all my schooling. It's like the more classes I take, the less I know. When I have my colleagues at Harvard, that's a very different institution than my colleagues that are at UCLA, than my colleagues that are in Texas. That doesn't make them right or wrong. It's just different points of learning. And I don't have to agree with other points of view. I know who I am, just like you know who you are. And our goal is not to change you or your children, but then they realize, okay, the classroom is very diverse. You hit it right on the head. We're a very diverse institution. That's why I like the district. It has the most racial diversity probably of any school in the state, but it also has socioeconomic diversity, perspective diversity. And now we realize, diversity is not just black and white anymore. It's not a black-white dichotomy. It's a broad perspective. And that's what we want them to understand, that it's a broad perspective. And if they don't understand, they could ask the questions and have the conversation, just like you are right now. You gave us your perspective. That's great. We respect your perspective. We value your perspective. It shouldn't scare you. You should just say, wow, I'd never thought about that. When I work with the teachers, I said, if you've been out of school more than 5 years, you probably haven't heard a lot of this terminology, which now they're hearing. That doesn't mean they have to use it. That doesn't mean they're forcing their kids. If they're not indoctrinating, they're educating. And that's the big difference. And people always want to push the indoctrination versus the education, where in the state of Missouri, a lot of things are focused on education. That's why we have a Department of Education and Secondary Education that oversees all of the things that we do. So we don't just come up with, I'm going to come up with a vision. Everything is laid out and everything is we clear it way in advance. And if there's something that comes up that may not be logical, we won't use it. Or if we hear feedback and say, you know what, this came in as in question, we'll always share with the leadership team. That's why I've got 2 great leaders here, because then they can bounce it off the rest of the leadership team and say, well, this question came up or this thought came up, and how are we doing better? And we're always evaluating what we do. Every time I do a session, I get evaluated, because to me it's important that they're successful as professionals. And that's why we incorporated into the parent piece, because you're the big part that sometimes our students don't have. Luckily your kids have you as a parent. We have a lot of kids that don't have parents, that might have been raised by a grandparent, might have had no parents. So, they have a different perspective. We're no longer the nuclear family. It's changed back to when I was a child. I had my mom and my dad. We grew up with a nuclear family, but I grew up in New Mexico. There's a lot of different things there than there are here. So we're just trying to we're trying to connect the dots. And that way they could say, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't realize that. This is very different. I don't like it. That's okay. You don't have to like everything. Part of it is, it's just like when you go to Baskin Robbins, you may not like all 31 flavors. You could try them all and say, oh, I like this one. I didn't know about it. And that's really that's how we learn and grow. Sorry, that was a long drawn answer.
No, thank you. So it's not about training, it's about
awareness. It's really more awareness. Yeah.
Awareness. Okay, I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around.
Yeah, and it's coming up not only on the education, but on the corporate side. I'm meeting with a company on Thursday that have a lot of suppliers that come from out of the city of Springfield that have a very different perspective of what diversity is to them.
Well, I will tell you, it's affecting our national, just our nation overall. And we lost Afghanistan because our leaders are focused on other garbage that they shouldn't be focused on. But that's neither here nor there. So my question now would be, what is the teachers? You're going to be teaching the teachers, kind of like train the trainers. What are they expected to do with this information in the classrooms with my kid?
Well, for me, most of it, and when I work with the leadership team, is give them the tools for awareness. Just like you're more aware of different terminology, different perspectives, doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just different, so that's why I showed you the implicit bias piece, so that you don't come in with a preconceived notion and say, well, this is what they're learning, this is what they're teaching. That's not it at all. We're evaluating it day to day, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues because they're embedded in the system. I come in at least once a month, maybe twice a month, so I know them more and more. But part of it is it's a continuous learning process for all of us.
So,
And
Go
the
ahead,
teachers
Sarah.
see the training, but as far as what they're asked to do in the classroom, we have curriculum, which if you would like to view, you absolutely can. That's based in Leader and Me that we covered the last session. And the teachers do teach those lessons in the classroom. And so that's what their piece of the diversity lessons for the kids is.
So how does this compare to CRT? Because you're not going to tell me this isn't CRT. I was born at night and I went to school on a short yellow bus, but I'm definitely, I got my thinking cap on.
Sure. CRT is a theory.
Hmm?
CRT that we look at is culturally responsive teaching. How can we better respond to your kids, the questions that may have? CRT is more a research-driven higher education. I'd looked at the embeddedness theory. I could say, well, I'm teaching the embeddedness theory. Well, what is that? That means what keeps you located in Waynesville? Your community, your house, your job, and what would be your sacrifice if you're left? That's a research theory. It's the same thing with the CRT. It's a component that came by 40 years ago. In fact, we did a session with our leadership team so they could understand what it really is. And it's really research, but somebody's taken part of it and said, this is what they're teaching our kids. That's not what we're teaching the kids.
Right.
No,
Which
it's,
is
in
not
fact, there's
what
not
we're
a school
teaching.
district in the state of Missouri that is teaching CRT.
Yeah,
But
not
somebody's
one
taken
district
that
in
and said,
Missouri
yeah.
teaches CRT. Yep.
And part of it is, oh, you're teaching. It's like we looked at an article and said, it's just like people in the 20s and 30s says, well, you're teaching communism. That's nothing but communism. There's language peppered all over everything that you read. So it depends what part you want to pull out and say, this is the truth. You said you come from biblical learning. People could take it and twist it just like everything else. So it's one of those things that can be twisted and say, that's not what was meant. I took a class that was called The Bible is Literature. It's not literature. Some people, has personal intrinsic value, they try to make it as a reading piece. I don't know how, but that was the class. That was an English class, and that was looking at more the structure of the written piece versus the content.
Thank you, Dr. Mraz. And it is 6:30. We didn't get to all the questions. So if you weren't able to ask a question, if you will email them to me or Mrs. Bales, we can get those questions answered for you. We had some in the chat, so I'm going to keep those, Mrs. Bales, so we've got those. So we can definitely follow up because we want to make sure that we get everyone's questions answered.
Does it have to be a hard end time, or can we keep the conversation going?
It is a hard end time, unfortunately, because we do have Juan booked for 5:30 to 6:30, but you're more than welcome to call or email questions, and we definitely can follow up on conversations.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the
Is it
question.
possible? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Is it possible for some of the other questions that come in, can you guys compile them and send them out to everybody, including the PowerPoints and videos that we saw like you did last time?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm saving and printing the chat out right now so I don't lose it. And then, yeah, we absolutely can put it out, and I can send it out to everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Taking a picture of them so I don't lose them. All right, well, thank you everybody for attending. Like I said, if you'll email me or Mrs. Bales, we'll get answers to your questions. I'll put them all together, send them out to everybody, and then send the presentation with the links as well, and we'll go from there. Have a good night. Thanks, everybody.